Hello and welcome back to another episode of Red Tinted Glasses, the Aberdeen podcast where dodgy Tashes and dodgy Aberdeen opinions are always welcomed. We're on the 11th of December when we're recording this, Phil, and your Movember attempt's still there.
Yeah, I did say to somebody on Twitter that if we beat St Johnston, it would maybe come off in celebration. So you've got our potential lackluster defending to blame for this still being on my face.
Yeah, I'm sure Rosie's absolutely thrilled, but she does like it a little bit, does she?
She does like it. She does like it. It gets a little bit tickly, but no complaints.
Oh, well, we'll leave that there. When we go back and we'll go to the football. We'll stick to that when we're talking about, because coming up on the episode today is a look back at the lackluster, to use your word, performance against St Johnston as the Dons continue their slumps, maybe a bit excessive, but run of games without a win, as a very disappointing 1-1 draw played in, again, pretty dismal conditions at Pittodrie. But we saw Jimmy Thelin ring the changes. Again, 3 changes to the lineup. Nicky Devlin, maybe a bit of a surprise omission. You and the Jack Milne fan club getting your wish to see the young defender start at right back. And then maybe a bit more surprising was the couple of changes up to the top half of the area, pitch, with Shaden Morris coming in from the start and Leighton Clarkson as well. Were you surprised to see 3 changes? We discussed, well, I say we, I mean me, spoke about Nielsen on the last episode about whether or not he should have started given his upcoming suspension for the game against Hibs, and if the game against St Johnstone was an ideal opportunity. But the Devlin omission for me was probably the biggest surprise.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously Nicky's played a lot of football. He's done a lot of running, and he's been such a great player for us this season. Um, So I think that was probably a surprise on that front, in terms of just how quality he's been. I think he did need a rest at some point, as we saw last season towards the tail end. The legs did start to go a little bit. Um, but yeah, I think for me the fact that Nielsen, I mean, obviously hindsight's 2020. We'll come on to speak about the opening goal in a bit, but just looked a little bit all over the shop at times. Could have maybe done with a bit of a tidier midfielder in there. Just sort of sort his feet out a little bit, shall we say. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I think obviously we're at the point in the season where Jimmy does need to make the changes. We've had quite a string of games, quite a string of intense games as well. So I don't think the changes should come as a shock. But yeah, they're not quite ringing as efficient as the ones off the bench had earlier on in the season.
Yeah, and it's, I don't know, baffling's not, again, for me, maybe a bit of a strong word, but we're not being able to land on a fixed, starting 11. And I know we've had a run of games where we have had to use the squad, and we've spoken about the effectiveness of a manager that can utilize the squad. But ultimately, at this current present moment, it's affecting our results and maybe level of performance. But I don't even think that that's kind of fair on Jimmy or the players, because over the course of the season so far, we've not really been able to string a 90-minute performance together. It's always been bit part. And again, the weekend past was another example of that.
Yeah, obviously earlier on in the season we've left it so late at times. And like you say, it's been bit part for the most part. Um, and I think obviously the injuries that we've sort of had recently haven't quite helped it, and the fact we've got players now getting close to suspension or suspended,
Mm-hmm.
it is proving tougher. And I think it has really highlighted the areas of the squad that does need strengthening come January, and even come summer as well. It's not going to get fixed in sort of 2 windows, and I think that's about this sort of rut, shall we say, as I believe the podcast title is. I think that's one thing to remember about this sort of rut. Joe, who listens to the podcast, had mentioned, we all said we were going to be patient with this team and with Jimmy, at the start of the season, and the first sign of a little bit of a dip in form. And it's sort of some of the things you've seen and heard either on social media, in Pittodrie, wherever it might be. I think we do need to kind of just stick by and, somewhat, I say, take the positive from it, in the sense of we now know where sort of the weaker parts lie, and where we do need to improve and get a bit of depth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you learn from your mistakes and you learn from what we do. And obviously you mentioned kind of the title of the podcast, and I do think Callum's a little bit clever with some of the titles he does, and they can be seen a little bit clickbaity, and obviously it's the joys of him training to be a journalist. And as I said in our WhatsApp chat, it's going to get the pant pishers wet, but I think this podcast has been filthy enough already in the opening 5 minutes. But it's one of those things where I guess Aberdeen fans are almost a little bit kind of scared to get ahead of ourselves, and there has been a little bit of an outpouring of overreaction to the results in the last 5 games, and I think the level of performance is the one that's the kind of real stickler for me. I looked at the St Mirren game, which was played in poor conditions on a heavy pitch. We struggled for large parts. Similarly against St Johnston, but then Celtic was a bit of an outlier. I thought the performance was there. Okay, the result wasn't, but mind was drifting towards Elgin and thinking middle of January, that pitch is probably going to be heavy. Conditions might not be favourable, but it's the nature of a football fan's mind that we always seem to be ingrained to fear the worst and never anticipate the best. And I think when we look at the depth of the squad, going back to a point that you made in that suspension tightrope, it does highlight a few things. But what doesn't help is when your centre back picks up one of the most needless bookings 2.5 minutes into the game. Now Ruby has to survive 3 games without picking up a booking, or he will be suspended, because I think it's 3 games and then all the bookings are wiped and we start again. But I can't believe folk were annoyed at that booking. It was the most cynical tackle I've seen in the first 2 minutes. He knew what he was doing and really left the referee with no choice.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. I think there's this sort of idea that your first one's free. That doesn't really fly in this day and age. It might have flied back in the 80s, but yeah, I think now if you go flying in at the speed he did, and leave one on the ball, you're gonna get booked. And it just left him on this awkward position where he couldn't do anything. Basically, it was left to Molloy or Milne or whoever to be the one that has to sort of step up and try and cut stuff out. Because if he was a split second off, he was probably away if he did another one. So yeah, a little bit frustrating, and I think it maybe does come back to the point that's been made on previous podcasts when we were speaking about McDonald coming into the lineup and would he calm Ruby down. I think it was that sort of erratic side in the opening couple of minutes that did seem to come out there from him. So yeah, I think it'll be tough maybe seeing Yuan running at him if he's at the same level as he was at the game at Easter Road, because yeah, that could be Ruby then suspended for Kilmarnock on Boxing Day, which would be unfortunate considering they're probably just going to be punting it long for the most part.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I did see a couple of responses to us on Twitter about Angus MacDonald and the calming influence that he brings, and kind of the calming presence our defence seemed to have against Hearts, which is quite ironic given it wasn't very calm at the goal that we conceded. But I do think there is something missing. But I want to speak about it now, because if I don't speak about it now, I will forget. Gavin Molloy's performance, a lot of be made about Rubezic and his booking. I think that performance from Gavin Molloy summed up what we've seen from him at his time at Aberdeen so far. Solid for the most part, but when he makes a mistake, boy, does he make a mistake. There was one in the first half that he does excellently, fair play to him to get back and clear the ball, but the mistake shouldn't happen in the first place to give the St Johnston forward the opportunity. And I always think in these cases, against better teams, better quality players, with the greatest of respect to St Johnston, they'll punish you. And there was a couple of examples in the second half where it was long, high balls. He looked so uncomfortable underneath them. And the worst thing as well, he was letting them bounce.
Yeah, I think that's been a bit of a track record for Gav this season. He's very all or nothing. He's either Baresi or he's me at fives on a Wednesday night, and it's there seems to not be much of an in between. But I think it's especially the high ball issue that worries me. There's been a few of them this season, where he seems to have been caught out. And I think a lot of the time, because he's so athletic, he can make up for it. But obviously, much like we have done for majority of the season, you can only ride your luck for so long before it eventually comes back to bite you at times. So yeah, I suppose a little bit of cause for concern there. And I think this is, this is another thing that obviously I think we want to try and come across with as well, is people have every right to be critical of performances, critical of players. By no means you're not supporting them. I saw a lot of discourse on that on Twitter. Standing in the stands booing them is maybe not the right way to go about it, but you can. Part of being critical is viewing a double-edged sword. Like you've said there, he's made up for it in a way, but at the same time, by God, just stick a head on it, please, because my heart was in my mouth. I about dropped my pie 4 times.
Yeah, I tell you, speaking of pies, and I know Calum's not here to do his usual pie review, but it was the first time I had a pie at Pataudry for a good while. That steak pie was phenomenal at the weekend, but I think probably aided the fact that it was absolutely freezing and it needed it to warm up. I was going to come on to it a little bit later on, but you mentioned it there, so we'll speak about it now. The booing and crowd frustration, I think we'll put it politely, that was being displayed throughout the first half from large sections of, well, maybe not large sections, but certainly sections of the Pataudry crowd at the weekend. I'll admit, found myself getting frustrated at kind of our inability to find a man in red at some of our passing, and for me, just general frustration that we just felt like we couldn't get going. I felt like that was the first time some of those players had met each other. I felt that Shinnie and Nielsen were tied to each other. Whatever way one went, the other one followed. There was no space. We were just playing too many short passes, and we couldn't kind of clear our lines. But you mentioned about fans being able to have frustration maybe without booing. We saw that in spells in the first half and at half time when the team got booed off at half time. But what I wanted to speak about was Graham Shinnie's reaction to the South Stand. Obviously, you'll have probably had a better kind of view of it than I will. And obviously, we're not joined by Callum on the podcast, but he was really unhappy at a lot of the booing that was going on. I have to admit, when I saw Shinnie reacting to the South Stand, I was more annoyed at Shinnie reacting because I felt the way he'd performed, he should probably focus on his own performance. But your thoughts on that, what we saw in the first half from the stands, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the same as you. I think obviously Shinnie's got to try and not react to it. Because obviously that, I guess in that way it's probably going to feed into more of them if he reacts. But at the same time, like you say, it's much like Callum. It was just annoying because I think so much has been made of how much the crowd has got the team going and dragged us over the line at points. And like you said earlier, I think there's just a lot of bedwetting going on. We're still, the run we've had in the position we're on, we're still in a good position. We've only lost 2 games. It's we're really not in a bad spot at the moment. We will come good again. I don't think anyone's got any doubt over that. And by all means, like I was frustrated. It was annoying. It was a really, really annoying first half.
Mm-hmm.
But by no means, I mean, God, I mean, I've booed the team off at halftime before, but that was when we're in a relegation scrap and we're getting beat like 4-0 by St Johnston, not 1-0 at halftime, where they've kind of had a little bit of a fortunate goal. So yeah, a little bit frustrating to see that sort of the crowds turned that quickly on Jimmy. Like I said earlier, there was so much made at the start of the season about him getting that time and getting that back in. So I think people need to try and sort of draw back on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's a strange one because I think people have the right to be frustrated. They have the right to vent their opinion and frustration, I guess, in what way they feel fit, because everybody's paid the same amount of money as me and you. But I think it's quite interesting. A lot of people obviously picking up on the point of how much good the crowd has done at Pataudry this season. We've spoken about it in the past, Queen's Park, and the other game, whose manager I can't remember, spoke about where they felt that the crowd dragged them over the line when we scored late on. And I think that is quite telling. The first signs of things maybe not working, not clicking, we snapped. But before we kind of come on to the goal, because I think this maybe kind of links a little bit, I thought it was a weird crowd at the weekend, and it's not any disrespect to the attendance, because I think we're just shy of 16,000, if I'm right, which is I think terrific for a game against St Johnston. But I know the weather was really grim. I know it's the festive period, but it didn't, certainly didn't feel as full as it's been. It was a lot quieter than we've seen. Again, I think the weather has a lot to play in that as well. But I just felt it had a bit of a weird kind of atmosphere. I don't know if you felt that as well.
Yeah, like you say, I think it's a tough one. 'Cause like you say, it's an awkward time of year. It's not exactly the sort of game that gets people's, gets their juices flowing, shall we say. It's not a Rangers, Celtic, Edinburgh team, Dundee United, or anything like that. It's St Johnston, who we also don't really have the greatest track record against as well. So I suppose on
Mm.
the current run, paired with that, potentially a lot of tension in the crowd, perhaps. And like I say, I think as the first half went on, that probably also didn't help as frustration began to creep in, and a potential bit of PTSD coming back to seasons gone by when we've been on this sort of run also maybe creeping in. But um, yeah, it was just it did just, especially going into halftime, it did just feel really, really awkward, intense, and yeah, wasn't fine.
Yeah, it was like, it was almost like a lover's tiff. We've started so well, and it's like, where the hell's this come from? But I think, for as much as we'll be speaking about the Aberdeen perspective, and I know a few Celtic fans weren't impressed with my efforts from the last episode, that I didn't give their team enough credit or speak about both sides. I think it does have to be highlighted how well St Johnston played throughout the 90 minutes, and it's probably the most attacking I've seen them at Pittodrie since they dismantled us 5-1.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they sort of did the same thing that St Mirren did, in my opinion. They didn't really bite into our press. They really kept their shape well, and they did take whatever opportunity they got to have on the ball. They took it to fly forward and really get down the line. I thought outside of his goal, I thought Mackenzie Kirk was really, really good whenever he got on the ball. Obviously, Kimpioka's showed himself to be a really capable out ball as well for St Johnston. So I was impressed. Yeah, I was impressed with how they lined up. New manager, with some maybe fresher outside of Scotland ideas, maybe starting to get a little bit of a tune out of them.
Yeah, I thought Simo Valakari had them really kind of passing and moving very well, and at times, although we did our best to aid that, allowed St Johnston to play football and maybe caught us out a little bit, I guess, because it's certainly not what we're used to, as you say, in those games. That I think you're absolutely right. An Aberdeen St Johnstone games never got the juices flowing for the football purists, but there was actually some decent passing football on display at times, despite the conditions. But it's certainly the goal we conceded is not one for the football purists as well. I mean, it feels like week in, week out, we're speaking about, certainly just now, we're speaking about soft goals, poor goals. This is a comedic goal. A lot of people, for me, I feel harshly blaming Jimmy McGarry, albeit when your centre back does smash a clearance off his forehead that leads to a goal, it probably is a bit funny, despite being deeply frustrating. I think putting blame on him is ridiculously harsh, though. Why is your centre mid trying a back heel, a blind back heel in the middle of the pitch after the other centre backs passed it to him from 3 yards? I don't know what Ruby and Nielsen are doing. It's car crash stuff, but yeah, after McGarry clears it off his face, there's absolutely nothing that anybody else can do. And okay, Mackenzie Kirk does well to finish it, but it's just such a bad goal once again from an Aberdeen point of view.
Yeah, it's another one of those, and again, I think it's probably the standard that he set of himself so early on in the season. But Nielsen again, really just not covering himself in too much glory. Again, it's maybe because I play fives on a Wednesday night that if I get the ball in a tight space like that, I'm just lumping it over the fence if I can. And yeah, try to whip out what I can only describe as some sort of pseudo elastical back heel, like a prime Ronaldinho, whilst you're getting pressed by two St Johnstone midfielders is yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. Migari as well. I mean, like I say, I feel sorry for him because it's the most comedic outcome he possibly could have got because I know exactly what he's trying to do. Again, probably should have just stuck a head on it and put it out for a corner. But obviously he's trying to be a bit more positive and get it up the pitch to see if anyone can actually, do something with a bouncing ball, perhaps. And it's just unfortunate. It's just hit him plumb in the face. But yeah, just like you say, it's just one of those frustrating ones again. But it's a soft goal we've conceded. We're not really making St Johnstone work for it, and I think that's the worst thing you want to give St Johnstone, especially when they're away from home, because they will just try and latch onto that as much as they can.
Yeah, absolutely spot on in that point. I think as soon as St Johnstone took the lead, it plays right into their hands, their tactics. I mean, I feel sorry for the Ray family. Josh will probably still be opening Christmas presents on Boxing Day. It takes him that long to do anything because that time wasting was unreal. And I mean, we were very fortunate not to concede a second once again after some more sloppy play in and around our box. As you said, without just putting your foot through it and getting it clear, trying to be too intricate and too clever when we don't need to be, nearly led to us conceding a second goal. I think your point on Migari is interesting as well because Keith texted me the same thing. He wasn't at the game, and he texted me saying, "What the fuck's he doing? Why is he not just heading it out or booting it into the Merkland?" And I'm like, I see that point. I think it's a fair point to ask. But I also go back to how many times have I watched Gavin Molloy trying to clear a ball this season and ask the same question. Ross County away, when thankfully the goal got disallowed, he could have booted it into the away end. What did he do? Pulled it back into the danger area. So I think it's maybe even something the way that we're being taught is to, where possible, keep the ball alive, which isn't certainly not going to fill most of us with the amount of confidence, but maybe does explain why Migari's done what he did instead of what maybe comes naturally to another player, is just clearing your lines, resetting and starting again and taking your chances to defend the corner. But in fairness to Jim, if he tries that another 9 times this season, he probably does put it over his shoulder and clears the danger. It was just the run we're on. The rub of the green's been going for us on this occasion, not so much.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I do think more blame for me lies in the middle of the park than the left back.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I say, going back to that point you've made about intricacy on the edge of our own box, I mean, it's something that's I think filled both of us with annoyance for a while now. Is intricacy in front of the opponent's box, especially in windy conditions like that. I've got no idea why we were still so adamant on trying to pass the ball into the net and score a beautiful goal. We've seen how much the ball was moving, how much the weather was playing havoc, and also just actually trying to test Ray as well a little bit to just have a pop shot. I think first half and second half that was really a bit of a gripe of mine with so many opportunities to just have a little pop, and we didn't. So it's again, I think it's a few things that just need to kind of line up and click for us and get us that full 90 performance.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I've not got a problem with us playing an expansive passing football style when it suits, but that's the key point. When it suits, there are times when you just need to lump it and put it clear if the situation presents itself. Because obviously, I think there was a fan spoke at the AGM and asked Jimmy Thelin to kind of stop playing it out from the back, and this is why Aberdeen can't have nice things, because we have fans that can't accept that it is going to take time. And I think Saturday was an example of that. And I know we're obviously kind of highlighting a couple of frustrations, but on the most part, I do think that Jimmy Thelin does have credit in the bank. This team does have credit in the bank as well. I was listening to Leighton Clarkson on STV News last night, and Chris Harvey had asked, you guys spent a lot of the time in the dressing room. Was it a bit of a debrief? What was going on? And he says, whatever's being said in the dressing room stays in there. We know it kind of not been playing to the right standards. We'll go away and work on things. But what I'm trying to get at is despite the credit that Jimmy has and the players have, it is still correct and allowed for us to sit here and question why Nicky Devlin was dropped, rested for 45 minutes when we've got a week off versus a player who is going to be suspended plays for 45 plus minutes. In Nielsen, I just personally don't get the logic in those two players. But again, that's not to say that had we started Nicky Devlin and Ante Palaversa, we'd be sitting here speaking about 3 points, because it's all ifs, buts, and maybes. But as football fans, not just podcasters, these questions will be brought up in group chats and around the tables at pubs, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, going back to that point you've made earlier as well about sort of Nielsen and Shinnie, probably again also shows how much we know. We've banged on so much about McGrath and Clarkson struggling to play together because they take up too much of the same spaces. But Shinnie and Nielsen were doing the exact same thing, and it's look, it's at the end of the day, everybody wants the best for the football club. Not even as fans. I mean, the players are wanting the best for the club as well. Jimmy's wanting the best for the club, and I think it is just this sort of desire to have that that level of standard. And as we've already said, it's testament to the standard they've set so early on. So I think we'll get back to that level. I think there is just some things that need to be fine tuned. I think Jimmy said that himself. A lot of the stuff, it's the mental side of the game. It's little things like this that are quick fixes. He just needs that time on the training pitch and with players one to work through them. So but ideally get sorted sooner rather than later, because the longer this sort of rut, shall we say, goes on, it's it'll just keep on feeding that part of the fan base that they do want to be a little bit more audible and direct with how they showcase it.
Yeah, and I think not necessarily just that. Although I do think that the frustrations that were being showcased at the St Johnston game, for me, certainly is because the performances haven't hit the heights of what we've come to expect. But it will also play into the West Coast media's agenda against us, and the fact that we've blown an X amount of point leads over Rangers and yada yada yada. But I still think where we're sitting right now in the league, we've got to remember we've played Celtic twice. Dundee United haven't played them once. So in terms of our hopes and aspirations, which I'm sure many would have said at the start of the season would have been to finish third, we're still in an excellent place. So yes, as Callum's titled the episode, the rut continues, but perspective of where we are and where we can still finish the end of the season needs to be kind of kept in focus, despite how certainly at the game and during the game we all may feel differently. I think obviously Colin Gale, a big fan of the show, tweeted us I think it was Sunday night, and we both said it's almost a good thing we're recording this episode a few days later, because this episode would probably have had a totally different tone had we sat down on Sunday night, even Monday night, to be honest, Phil. But we're sitting here halfway through the week after the result, and I think you're a little bit more calmer and you can see a bit of the bigger picture.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
When we look at areas, I want to come to what you said about fine tuning. Probably the biggest area we need to fine tune right now is up front. Kevin Nisbet, a player that has come in for a lot of criticism after the weekend's draw. But I don't know what difference Esther Sockler would have made. And that's not me trying to defend Kevin Nisbet or slander Esther Sockler, because both would be working off the same service and the service wasn't there.
Yeah, no, I think the best way I can describe the game for the most part was just quite lethargic. It felt like there just wasn't really any movement anywhere, and I think that really then just fed into the lack of service. The wingers didn't really have anyone to link up with either in front of them or behind them if they needed to play a quick sort of ball and then get in behind. Likewise for Nisbet, if he came deep to get the ball, there was no one really going ahead of him. Yeah, it just felt like a real tough game, and I think maybe potentially we were taking Viovski's skill set a bit for granted. I think at times in Nisbet and Sock we're in this sort of catch-22 where one offers you, the more reliable finishing and one offers you the movement, whereas Miovski kind of gave us that nice blend of the two. So yeah, I mean, you could potentially argue that Sock might have been a bit more mobile, put them under pressure a little bit more that way, but conversely at the same time, albeit apart from the Hibs game, sort of showing me up, you're probably backing Kevin over Sockler if the ball falls, within the 18-yard box for one chance in a game. So it is a tough one. I feel like we could have probably definitely again done a lot more around the box in terms of try to challenge the keeper a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I think if we did sort of put them under a little bit of pressure in their goal mouth a little bit more, maybe the pressure would have eventually got to them and they would have crumbled a bit. But it's all sort of what ifs now. But yeah, a little bit. So it's something that I think definitely could be looked to improve in January for sure. I think is sort of quality in that top end of the pitch.
Yeah, and I guess again that's something that certainly Callum's going to thrive on next month is transfer rumours and what we see kind of develop there. But as much as maybe some of us are concerned or want to see the defence addressed in January, my concerns are certainly growing in the forward area, and obviously I'm not saying Pierre Ambrose is going to be the miracle worker, but we're not even seeing him in any shape or form at this moment in time. But if we go back to kind of looking at the way Jimmy responded to the first half performance and the criticism that were coming down from the stand, 3 changes at half time. Once again, instant impact. Ante Palaversa with an absolute sublime pass to Duke, who held his line and timed the run really well. And brilliant cutback to Leighton Clarkson to finish and equalise. Brilliant goal. Don't really know how much we kicked on from that. But how much do you think us making the 3 changes at halftime? And again, I go back to Nicky Devlin not starting when he got brought on at halftime, albeit it was for Jimmy McGarry moving Jack Milne over to left wing back. Still feel like if he was fit enough to start, he could have. How much do you think those 3 changes maybe affected us later in the game? Because we've kind of seen a bit more impact once we get to 75 minutes when we put on those fresher players. Again, Shaden Morris not doing too much as a starter and maybe missing that impact. But I thought Duke did that role well. Vinny until his injury, which we'll come on to because I know we didn't think he was injured at the time. Did you think that 3 changes did cost us as the game went on?
Yeah, I think slightly. Like I said, we've been such a, whether it's Tope, Shady, Vinny, Duke, whoever it might be, having that sort of fresh set, especially in the wide areas, later on in the game, really does suit us quite well. I also think as well, no doubt it disrupted our shape a little bit. I feel bad for Jack Milne. I thought he was having a stormer of a game at right back. In all fairness to him, and potentially would have maybe liked to see him in that holding midfield role. When Nielsen was coming off, I maybe would have just moved Milne up and put Devlin in at right back. But obviously, there's maybe something up with Jimmy, whether it was an injury or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think again, putting him out to left backs maybe slightly tough on him, position that he doesn't play in, and especially on this rut as well, where it felt like you had people on your back at every turn. Potentially a bit harsh on him, and definitely disrupted the shape a bit.
It was probably a concussion for McGarry. He was suffering after. But yeah, no, I think you're right on to highlight Jack Milne, probably one of the kind of shining lights from the game, and I think also Leighton Clarkson as well. Obviously the way he took the goal, but the way he kind of put himself about in that number 10 role, I thought he did very well. I thought both Duke and Palaversa did well when they came on as well. and they had that kind of impact. But
I think
again, it was kind of some of that little passing and movement around the edge of the box. I know we obviously have discussed that maybe we're still trying to score that perfect goal rather than taking that pop shot, and just put that St Johnstone defence under pressure, get the crowd going. And there didn't seem to be enough of that consistently enough to keep the crowd's momentum interested in the game, I guess.
Yeah, and I think especially with Palaversa coming on as well, it's almost like he seems to be on a different wavelength to people at points, and I think it is just because he sees the game so well. You know, the amount of times he was playing these little dinked balls in behind the St Johnstone back line, and there was just nobody had made the run. And you're just thinking, God, if somebody's on the back of that, you're one on one. So yeah, again, another thing that once that sort of clicks a little bit more, maybe there'll be a little bit less cause for concern. But yeah, I think it's been a bit of a story for us this season. I feel like when we've often gone behind, we'll get the equaliser and really just, when that momentum swings, not really do anything with it and just kind of revert back to what we were doing pre-equaliser. And again, I don't know if that comes down to that's a sort of coaching decision, or if it's just sort of, I don't know, some sort of worry from the players of going too soon and then being leggy towards the end or whatnot. I've not really got a clue, but yeah, it's I would like to see a sort of grasp on at that momentum a little bit more consistently.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree entirely with that. I see where you're coming. I do see where you're coming from, but I do feel we tend to capitalize on the momentum, but it's almost like we regroup for 5 minutes before we go again, which is, I think, where my mind's at, which is why I can't fully agree on what you're saying. I'm sure people will let us know their thoughts on that as well. But yeah, unfortunately, the St Johnstone game just didn't quite click for us in that sense that we could capitalise. And I did, think that, especially with being at home, we could capitalise on any momentum shift, which unfortunately didn't come. And I think, the frustrating thing when you look at the last, well, 3 of the last 4 games, obviously coming against bottom 6 opposition, failure to win those games kind of really hurts from what we have been doing. And when you do have hopes of splitting the 2 teams from Glasgow, let alone finishing third, you do have to be beating bottom of the table teams and St Johnstone at home. You simply have to.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the sort of runs we've had in previous seasons where it's not gone well, I think that is what has defined our season, is our inability to pick up those wins, or even pick up draws at times. Especially, in last season's case, our inability to really pick up the points in all respect to all these teams that we really should be. And I think obviously we've done a much better job of that this season, which is why I'm not really getting too concerned. I don't think this run's really going to go on to greatly define our season. Like you said, I think most of us had that expectation of third anyway. So I think even the fact that Rangers have closed the gap to, what is it now, 2 points, I believe.
Yeah.
If you weren't coming to us on the 11th of December and this was the start of the season, we probably would be saying, yeah, it'll probably be Celtic, Rangers, Aberdeen's the top 3. So the fact that on the 11th of December they're still, breathing down our neck, albeit behind us, I don't really think it's time to be too worried in how these games are going. Although it's something that you're wanting sorted sooner rather than later. Despite that,
I also think if you said to us on the 11th of December you'd be sitting second, 2 points clear of Rangers, you'd have bitten your hand off at the start of the season, obviously not knowing how the season progresses between the start and the date that we picked. So it's just the fickle nature of football. It really is, and it's why I love this game so much, because it makes the highs so sweet and makes the lows so painful at the same time. It's that roller coaster of emotion that we strap ourselves in for from August to May. And, even hearing us, leaving the game like, we'll take the point. I was like, oh, we're going to fucking take a point. You've got to be taking all 3 at home at St Johnstone. But once you get in, you calm down and you think about it and go, you've even made that point. Last season we probably don't come back to grab a point, but we weren't at our best for large spells of the game, and we still took something from the game. So it's just that reaction of how you view the game during the 90 minutes and then calm down and reevaluate, which is, as I said, sometimes why it's better doing these things a few days later, because it can just be a bit blinded by the love you have. But unfortunately, this weekend, Phil, we don't have anything to discuss because the Dons won't be in action, as it's the League Cup final. Our trip to Ibrox has now been moved into the middle of January. Looking at how the game went, and you've mentioned fine-tuning, does this in a way actually suit us having a week off, given the excessive run of games we've been on? And I think as well, we haven't actually mentioned that St Johnstone possibly benefited from the fact they went into the game at the weekend off the back of having a free midweek, and we had to have that 90 minutes in those tough conditions against Celtic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think gives obviously Jimmy and the team that time on the training ground. I believe the lads have probably been away on their Christmas night out as well, so maybe a little bit more team bond and a little bit more of that sort of wavelength for Palaversa to start firing in 40-yarders on a 5 pence behind the back line. But yeah, I think it's with how lethargic and leggy some of the performances have looked. I think it's as much as earlier on in the season we were saying these breaks had maybe came at the wrong point and could have potentially stifled our good form. I think this is probably the exact right time we need, and especially with the fact that Hibs seem to be turning the corner ever so slightly in terms of their performances as well. So I think having that time to sort of regroup before their trip up to Tawdry is probably well needed from my perspective at least.
Yeah, and obviously they got plaudits for their performance at Parkhead, albeit no points. They entertain Ross County at home this weekend. Obviously, the Staggies not the best of travellers, so an opportunity for Hibs to put points on the board and give themselves a little bit of a pick-me-up before they head up to Pataudry. And obviously, we've kind of started that little bit of feel-good run that they were on with the late drama. I actually saw a picture of that equaliser today when I was scrolling on Twitter and realising that Rocky Bashiri did genuinely miss the ball and it hit his shin before going in, really hitting the PTSD feels. One final thing then to wrap up from the draw against St Johnston. There was a picture going around on WhatsApp today of Vinny Bizawin in a wheelchair in Aberdeen Airport. Knee brace, looks set to miss a few weeks action. Disappointing for Vinny, and probably due him an apology because I was absolutely fuming at how long he stayed down for initially. I just get up and get on with it. Stop wasting time. And then realised it looked probably a bit more serious than I originally believed.
Yeah, I mean, it looked like he took a fair clatter, but it was one of those ones where I was like, he's going down because he's trying to get the boy, potentially sent off or something. Cause like I've got no idea if the boot was high, yada yada yada. But I was like you, and I was going, God, just we're in the dying moments. Please, just let us get something into the box and put them under a bit of pressure. Don't let them all just flood back and catch their breath. But I did see a few folks saying it was maybe not the challenge, but the fact his knee potentially obviously buckled underneath him with his standing leg, which obviously in the south stand I can barely see 2 rows in front of me, let alone the corner flag at the red shed. So yeah, and I think that probably is the ones that worry you a bit more when it isn't exactly an impact injury. It's something, I guess, off the ball in a sense. So yeah, hopefully not too long out for him if it is a bit of a lengthy spell on the sidelines, because I was hoping to maybe see him get a little bit of a run, because I do think he has looked quite positive when he's been coming off the bench. So I was hoping to maybe see him get some more minutes and obviously try and get us back on that that sort of point of our wingers and our attacking options being the sort of game changers when games get tight.
Yeah, and I guess it just shows that sometimes maybe the innocuous injuries are potentially the worst ones, and it's that more of a impact injury onto his standing leg or the knees jarred when trying to land, because it wasn't, I don't think it was a poor tackle, it was definitely not a well timed tackle, and it's just unfortunate for Vinny in that sense. But yeah, let's just hope that obviously next week when we reconvene, we'll have a bit more of a preview on the Hibs game. So at least shouldn't be any negativity on next week's episode. But let's round off this latest episode of Red Tinted Glasses by speaking about fixtures. I spoke on the last episode about our Scottish Cup tie against Elgin potentially being played on a Monday night due to TV picks. Sensationally, and maybe surprisingly, the game has not been picked for television, so the Dons will head to Borough-Briggs on Saturday the 18th of January for a likely 3 p.m. kickoff. Fantastic news for the matchday going fan, but are you surprised?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's half and half. I'm surprised because I thought it would have been a good game for TV, and obviously it would have been nice for Elgin to have that sort of added eyes on them factor. Also, then slightly not surprised when I've looked at the games that have been picked for TV, and I'm pretty sure all of them involve a team from the Central Belt, pretty much. So, probably to be expected from Scottish football's TV choices. But yeah, a Saturday 3 p.m. if that's the way it goes. Absolutely buzzing. We'll be doing my damnedest to get my hands on a ticket there, and Alan Hale, the Elgin coach, gutted for him it's not at Pittodrie, because I know that's always been one of his ambitions, is to come out the tunnel at Pittodrie and coach a team there. So, but I'm sure Elgin supporters, players, and everything will be buzzing for that. And yeah, I think it would be a really good day out when it comes round. I think, like I say, it might be harder to get a ticket there than it will be, or easier to get a ticket there, should I say, than it will be for Dundee United at this rate.
Oh, what a setup, Phil. Smashed it. Yes. Dundee United announced their ticket allocation for the trip to Tannadice, and the Dons will not be housed in the Carling stand, as they call it, or the shed as we know it. The Dons will be given the Fair Play and Jerry Kerr up and down, which does not write.
Upper and lower. You nearly got there.
So same as the last time we went down to Tannadice, a bit late in the day for announcing it. Mixed opinions on that one for me. There's something special about the shed and the memories I've got being in there, seeing the Carrie Arneson goal, that last minute Peter Pollock goal when I spent the whole bus journey to Dundee sleeping because I'd spewed before I got on after still being out the night before, when New Year's Day football was still a thing. But given their home attendances this season, and obviously we see it ourselves at Pittodrie, with festive fixtures attracting bigger crowds, as long as they sell the tickets to their own fans, they've got every right. We do it. We see it now with Section R being used in the away or home fans.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. I think a lot of us have a lot of nostalgia about the sort of trips we've had and being housed in the shed, but it'll be frustrating if it's sitting looking empty come the 29th. And I think especially with the sort of shambles that's gone around it, the 11th of December, finally getting an announcement about tickets. So what's that? 18 days before a game. It's a new firm derby, if people are still calling it that, over the festive period. It should have been in place well before, and I think the fact that Celtic are getting the shed, I believe, for their trip there, and from what I've heard, the whole reason it's been delayed is because they're wanting to wait and see what the uptake was going to be from home fans for the Celtic game, which unfortunately, as much as it pains me to say it, is probably not going to be compatible to us. Of course, fans are going to uptake for a Celtic game, because half of them are probably going to be Celtic fans that are in the home end, but the less I say, the better. So yeah, I think it'll still be a good trip regardless. Looking forward to heading down, as much as my mum's probably not going to forgive me for leaving her on her birthday, but needs must.
Yeah. Well, I'm back to work on the 30th, so needs must for a day out before going back to work for a couple of days before New Year. But certainly 2 away games I am very much looking forward to, especially with that Elgin game being confirmed for Saturday at 3 o'clock. And I know a few people will now be looking at trains up for that game as well, and certainly one that will get us excited, as will that trip to Tannadice. So a little bit more of a positive note to end the podcast on today. And I also just want to reiterate from last week's show the charities that we've been helping over the festive period. And I just want to say a huge thanks to those that donated to Aber Necessities wish list from last week's show. They want to also extend their thanks, as does Neve, for the support shown to Lifestars and funding the P7 trip for Hanover Primary. So I'll put the link for that back in the description here on YouTube, and it'll also be available on the audio for those that want to continue to support Lifestars and the work that they're doing for the local primary school kids in the Aberdeen and Shire area as well. And we'll continue to put Aber Necessities wish lists up as well. They're coming to the end of their kind of Christmas campaign and the demand, but obviously always in need of stuff. So just want to extend the thanks to those of you from last week's show that have supported both charities on their behalf as well as our behalf as well. So that's all from myself and Phil for another week. Thanks very much for joining us. Until next time, we'll see you then.